In the bustling city of Lagos, Nigeria, where skyscrapers kissed the sky and luxury cars prowled the streets, lived Adebayo Olayinka. A man of immense wealth and influence, Adebayo had built an empire from nothing, his name synonymous with success and power. His newest acquisition, however, was not a company or a property, but a wife, the breathtakingly beautiful Olayinka. Olayinka was the talk of the town, her beauty rivaling that of the rising sun over the Atlantic. With skin like polished ebony and eyes that sparkled brighter than the diamonds adorning her slender neck, she was a vision that turned heads wherever she went. But Olayinka was more than just a pretty face. She possessed a sharp mind and a kind heart, traits that had initially drawn Adebayo to her. Their wedding was the event of the year, with politicians, business tycoons, and celebrities from across Africa in attendance. The couple spared no expense, from the imported champagne that flowed like water to the gold-plated cutlery that graced each table. As they exchanged vows under an arch of rare orchids, many whispered that this was a match made in heaven, the Lion of Lagos and his elegant lioness. But beneath the glitz and glamour, a storm was brewing. Unbeknownst to the newlyweds, forces were at work that would soon bring their world crashing down around them. Adebayo's empire was built on connections, bribes, and a web of lies so intricate that even he sometimes lost track of where truth ended and deception began. For years, he had managed to stay one step ahead of his rivals and the law, but his luck was about to run out. It started with whispers, then grew to murmurs, and finally exploded into screaming headlines across every newspaper in the country. Olayinka empire crumbles, fraud and corruption exposed. The story broke like a tidal wave, washing away years of carefully constructed facades and leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. Government officials who had once dined at Adebayo's table now scrambled to distance themselves from him. Business partners vanished overnight, their phones suddenly out of service. The vultures descended, picking apart the carcass of his once mighty conglomerate. Olayinka watched in horror as her husband aged years in a matter of days. The strong, confident man she had married seemed to shrink before her eyes, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his collapsing world. But even as others abandoned him, she stood firm, her love a beacon in the darkness that threatened to engulf them. As the weeks passed, their situation grew increasingly dire. Assets were frozen, accounts emptied, and properties seized. The couple found themselves evicted from their mansion, forced to seek shelter in a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city. The fall from grace was steep and merciless. It was on a sweltering evening, as they sat in their dimly lit room with the sounds of the neighborhood filtering through paper-thin walls, that Adebayo hit rock bottom. Tears streamed down his face as he confessed to Olayinka the full extent of their predicament. "My love," he whispered, his voice cracking, "we have nothing left. The rent is due, and we don't have a single naira to our name. We might end up on the streets." Olayinka held him close, her own heart breaking at the despair in his voice. "We will find a way," she assured him, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her words. As if on cue, a knock sounded at the door. Adebayo opened it to find a face he had hoped never to see again, Chidi Nwosu, his former business rival and a man known for his ruthlessness in both the boardroom and the bedroom. Chidi's eyes gleamed with a predatory light as they swept over the squalid apartments before settling on Olayinka. My, he chuckled, "how the mighty have fallen. But I'm here to offer you a lifeline, old friend." The proposal he laid out made Adebayo's blood run cold. Chidi would provide them with enough money to secure housing and basic necessities, but the price was steep: one night with Olayinka. "You must be mad." Adebayo roared, his fist clenching at his sides. But Chidi merely smiled, placing a thick envelope on the rickety table. "The choice is yours," he said smoothly. "But remember, pride won't keep a roof over your heads or food in your bellies." With that, he left, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the stale air. Adebayo and Olayinka stared at the envelope, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. They had been shunned by family and friends alike, their calls for help met with cold silence or cruel laughter. This offer, as repugnant as it was, might be their last chance to avoid complete destitution. As the night wore on, their conversation became more desperate, more fractured. Olayinka, her voice trembling, spoke of her love for Adebayo, of her willingness to do anything to save them from ruin. Adebayo, torn between his pride and the reality of their circumstances, felt something inside him break. Dawn found them exhausted, eyes red-rimmed and hearts heavy. The decision they had reached sat between them like a living thing, ugly and unavoidable. With shaking hands, Adebayo dialed Chidi's number. The days that followed were a blur of shame and silent recrimination. Olayinka prepared herself as if for battle, her face a mask of determination even as her soul screamed in protest. Adebayo alternated between bouts of rage and periods of catatonic silence, unable to look his wife in the eye. On the appointed evening, a sleek black car pulled up outside their building. Olayinka, dressed in the last of her fine clothes, kissed Adebayo's cheek before stepping out into the warm night air. As the car pulled away, Adebayo fell to his knees, sobs racking his body. Hours passed like years. Adebayo paced the small apartment, alternating between praying for Olayinka's safety and cursing himself for his weakness. When she finally returned, just before sunrise, neither spoke. They simply held each other, their tears mingling as they mourned for what they had lost. The money, as promised, arrived the next day. It was enough to secure a modest apartment and keep them afloat for a few months. But the cost weighed heavily on them both. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, painfully, they began to rebuild their lives. Adebayo, humbled by his fall and desperate to redeem himself, took any job he could find. He worked as a laborer, a night watchman, anything to bring in honest money. Olayinka, drawing on her education, found work as a teacher at a local school. Their love, tested by fire, emerged changed but unbroken. They spoke little of that fateful night, but its shadow loomed large over their relationship. Trust, once implicit, now had to be rebuilt brick by brick. As they struggled to find their footing in this new reality, whispers of their story began to circulate. Some spoke of them with pity, others with disdain. But there were those who saw in their tale a reflection of their own struggles, their own difficult choices. It was at this time that an unexpected figure entered their lives, Mama Zainab, an elderly woman who ran a small restaurant near their new home. She had heard snippets of their story and recognized in them the pain of outcast. Without fanfare or force, she took them under her wing, offering not just employment but also the warmth of acceptance they so desperately craved. Under Mama Zainab's gentle guidance, Adebayo and Olayinka began to heal. They worked side by side in the tiny kitchen, learning to laugh again as they chopped vegetables and stirred pots of fragrant stew. The simple act of creating nourishing food for others became a balm for their wounded spirits. But even as they found a measure of peace, the past refused to stay buried. Chidi Nwosu, emboldened by their previous encounter, began to make his presence felt once more. He would show up at the restaurant, ostensibly as a customer, his eyes following Olayinka's every move. Each time, Adebayo's fist would clench at his sides, the old rage threatening to boil over. Olayinka, for her part, faced Chidi with a quiet dignity that both awed and shamed her husband. She neither cowered nor lashed out, simply going about her work as if he were any other patron. But Adebayo could see the toll it took on her, the way her hands would tremble slightly as she poured Chidi's water or set down his plate. One evening, as they closed up the restaurant, Olayinka finally broke her silence on the matter. "We cannot run forever," she said softly, her eyes meeting Adebayo's in the dim light. "Sooner or later, we must face what happened and find a way to truly move forward." Adebayo nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He knew she was right, but the thought of confronting their past filled him with dread. How could they possibly overcome the shame, the guilt, the lingering trauma of that night? As if sensing the turmoil in their hearts, Mama Zainab chose that moment to speak up. "My children," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years, "every scar tells a story. But it is up to us whether that story ends in bitterness or in growth." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a bomb all at once. Adebayo and Olayinka looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had survived the fall from grace, had weathered the storm of poverty and desperation. Perhaps now it was time to do more than just survive, perhaps it was time to truly live again. But the path forward was far from clear. The wounds of the past were still raw, and the specter of Chidi Nwosu loomed large over their fragile peace. As they locked up the restaurant and stepped out into the warm Lagos night, Adebayo and Olayinka knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The story of the fallen tycoon and his beautiful wife had spread through Lagos like wildfire, taking on the quality of an urban legend. Some spoke of them with scorn, others with a grudging admiration for their resilience. But for Adebayo and Olayinka, the opinions of others mattered less with each passing day. They had each other, they had honest work, and they had the beginnings of a new community in the form of Mama Zainab and the regulars at the restaurant. Yet, as they walked home hand in hand, both knew that the real test was still to come. The money from that fateful night was long gone, spent on survival and the slow process of rebuilding their lives. But the emotional debt remained, a weight that threatened to drag them under if they didn't find a way to address it. As they reached their modest apartment, a familiar car idled at the curb. Chidi Nwosu stepped out, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. His smile was predatory as he approached the couple. Well, he drawled, "Isn't this a charming domestic scene? The mighty Adebayo Oladil and his lovely wife, playing at being common folk. But we all know the truth, don't we? We know what you're really capable of." Adebayo's fist clenched at his sides, but before he could speak, Olayinka stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her eyes blazed with a fierce determination. "What do you want, Chidi?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for games. Chidi's smile widened. "Why, I'm here to offer you another opportunity, of course. The two of you, scratching out a living in this hovel. It's beneath you. I can change all that with a snap of my fingers. All it would take is no." The word came from both Adebayo and Olayinka simultaneously, a united front against the temptation Chidi represented. For a moment, surprise flickered across Chidi's face, quickly replaced by anger. "You ungrateful," he began, but Olayinka cut him off. "We are grateful for nothing from you," she said, her voice steady. "What happened that night was a mistake born of desperation. It will not happen again. We may have lost our wealth, Chidi, but we found something far more valuable, our self-respect." Adebayo, finding his voice at last, added, "You have no power over us anymore. Leave now, and don't come back." Chidi's face contorted with rage. "You think this is over," he spat. "I own you. I can destroy what little you've managed to rebuild with a single phone call." But as he ranted, something shifted in the air. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their homes. Among them was Mama Zainab, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, coming to stand beside Adebayo and Olayinka. Chidi, suddenly aware of the growing crowd, faltered. These were not the elite of Lagos, easily swayed by money and influence. These were people who had known struggle, who recognized the stench of a bully. "This doesn't concern you," Chidi snapped, but his bravado was cracking. Mama Zainab's eyes narrowed. "These young people are part of our community now," she said firmly. "Their concerns are our concerns. So I'll ask you again, is there a problem here?" The tide had turned, and Chidi knew it. With a final glare at Adebayo and Olayinka, he retreated to his car and sped away, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burning rubber. As the neighbors dispersed, offering words of support and solidarity, Adebayo and Olayinka stood in stunned silence. They had faced their demon and emerged victorious, not through wealth or cunning, but through the strength of their bond and the unexpected support of their new community. Mama Zainab placed a weathered hand on each of their shoulders. "Come," she said gently, "I think it's time we all had a talk." As they followed her back to the restaurant, Adebayo and Olayinka exchanged a look. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of true hope. They had hit rock bottom and survived. Now, perhaps, it was time to start the long climb back up, not to their old lives of hollow luxury, but to something new, something built on a foundation of love, honesty, and hard-won wisdom. The warm lights of the restaurant beckoned, promising not just a conversation, but the beginning of a new chapter. As they stepped inside, closing the door on the chaos of the night, both Adebayo and Olayinka knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger for having been broken, and wiser for having lost their way. The warm glow of Mama Zainab's restaurant enveloped Adebayo and Olayinka as they settled into a corner booth, the events of the night still fresh in their minds. Mama Zainab bustled about, shooing away the last lingering customers before joining the couple, a steaming pot of pepper soup in her hands. "Now," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "it's time we talked about the elephant in the room." As the rich aroma of the soup filled the air, Adebayo and Olayinka found themselves pouring out their story, the dizzying heights of their former life, the crushing fall, and the desperate decision that had haunted them ever since. Mama Zainab listened without judgment, her wise eyes taking in every detail. When they finished, a heavy silence fell over the table. Finally, Mama Zainab spoke. "The past cannot be changed, my children. But it need not define your future. What happened was a moment of weakness, yes, but also one of great love and sacrifice. Now, you must decide, will you let it destroy you, or will you use it to build something stronger?" Her words were interrupted by a commotion outside. The door burst open, and a young woman stumbled in, her clothes torn and her face streaked with tears. "Help me," she gasped before collapsing to the floor. Olayinka rushed to the woman's side, cradling her head. As she brushed back the stranger's hair, she gasped. The woman's features, though bruised and swollen, were hauntingly familiar. "Adebayo," Olayinka called, her voice shaking, "come look at this." Adebayo knelt beside them, his eyes widening in shock. The unconscious woman bore an uncanny resemblance to Olayinka. They could have been sisters. As they tended to the mysterious woman, a sense of unease settled over the group. Who was she? And what forces had driven her to their doorstep on this tumultuous night? The answer came sooner than they expected. As dawn broke over Lagos, casting long shadows through the restaurant windows, the young woman finally stirred. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Olayinka's, fluttered open. "Where am I?" she mumbled, trying to sit up. "You're safe," Olayinka soothed, helping her to a sitting position. "Can you tell us your name?" The woman hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "Amora," she finally whispered. "My name is Amora." As Amora sipped water and gathered her strength, her story began to unfold, a tale that would shake Adebayo and Olayinka to their core. Amora, it turned out, was no random stranger. She was a living, breathing link to Olayinka's past, a past that had been shrouded in mystery for as long as she could remember. "I'm your sister," Amora said, her voice trembling. "Your twin sister." The revelation hit Olayinka like a physical blow. She staggered back, her mind reeling. "That's impossible," she breathed. "I'm an only child. My parents." But even as the words left her mouth, long-buried memories began to surface. Hushed conversations overheard as a child. Shadowy figures glimpsed at family gatherings. A persistent feeling that something, or someone, was missing from her life. Amora's story spilled out in a torrent of words. Their parents, it seemed, had been involved in something far more sinister than anyone had ever suspected. Deeply in debt to a powerful criminal organization, they had made an unthinkable choice to sell one of their newborn twins to cover what they owed. They chose you to keep, Amora said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I was given to the organization. Raised to be. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implications were clear. Amora had been groomed from infancy to be a pawn in the criminal underworld, her very existence a closely guarded secret. As Adebayo listened to this unfolding tragedy, a cold dread began to seep into his bones. The criminal organization Amora spoke of, could it be the same shadowy group that had orchestrated his own downfall? The coincidence seemed too great to ignore. Before he could voice his suspicions, Amora dropped another bombshell. I've been searching for you for years, she told Olayinka. But I'm not the only one. There are people, dangerous people, who want to find you too. And now that I'm here, they won't be far behind. As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Through the restaurant windows, they could see several black SUVs pulling up, disgorging men in dark suits. We have to go, Adebayo said urgently, his instincts from his business days kicking in. Now. What followed was a frantic escape through the back alleys of Lagos. Mama Zainab, proving herself to be far more than just a kindly restaurateur, led them through a maze of hidden passages and secret doorways. Lagos has many layers, she explained as they hurried along. Those who know how to look can always find a way out. As they fled, Adebayo's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want with Olayinka? And how did it all tie back to his own spectacular fall from grace? Their flight eventually led them to an unexpected sanctuary, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As they caught their breath, Mama Zainab revealed another surprise. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved a dusty metal box. I had hoped never to open this again, she said, her voice heavy with resignation. But it seems the past is not content to stay buried. Inside the box were documents, photographs, and a small notebook filled with cryptic codes. As they pored over the contents, a complex web of deceit and corruption began to emerge, one that stretched back decades and implicated some of the most powerful figures in Nigerian society. Adebayo's hands shook as he recognized names and faces from his former social circle. Pieces of the puzzle that had eluded him for months suddenly began to fall into place. His downfall hadn't been an isolated incident, it had been part of a much larger, more sinister plan. But the true shock came when Olayinka found a photograph hidden in the lining of the box. It showed two identical baby girls, herself and Amora, cradled in the arms of a much younger Mama Zainab. You knew, Olayinka whispered, her voice a mix of accusation and disbelief. All this time, you knew who I was. Mama Zainab's eyes filled with tears. I was there the night you were born, she confessed. I was the midwife who delivered you both. When your parents made their terrible choice, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I've been watching over you ever since, waiting for the day when the truth would finally come out. The revelations came fast and furious after that. Mama Zainab, it turned out, was far more than just a simple restaurant owner. She was a key figure in an underground resistance movement, dedicated to exposing the corruption that had rotted the core of Nigerian society. Your parents were just pawns, she explained. The real power lies with a group known as the Syndicate. They've been pulling strings in Nigeria for generations, manipulating politics, business, everything. Your separation was just one small part of their grand design. As night fell once again, the four unlikely allies huddled in the dimly lit warehouse, piecing together the fragments of their shared history. The Syndicate, they learned, had fingers in every pie, from oil contracts to arms deals, from political campaigns to international money laundering operations. Adebayo's business empire, built on what he had thought were his own cunning and connections, had in fact been carefully orchestrated by the syndicates from the very beginning. He had been groomed, much like Amora, to play a specific role in their machinations. But why? Adebayo asked, his voice hoarse. Why go to all this trouble? The answer, when it came, was both simple and terrifying. Power, Mama Zainab said softly. And a prophecy. She spoke of an ancient tradition, passed down through generations of seers and mystics. It foretold the coming of twins who would have the power to either cement the syndicate's control over Nigeria or bring about its total destruction. That's why they separated you, she told Olayinka and Amora. They believe that together, you pose a threat to everything they've built. Apart, they hope to control you, to use your potential for their own ends. As the implications of this sank in, a new determination filled the group. They had been pawns in this game for too long. Now, armed with the truth and united by their shared suffering, they had a chance to fight back. But the path ahead was fraught with danger. The syndicate's reach was vast, its resources nearly limitless. And now that Olayinka and Amora were reunited, the full force of their attention would be focused on eliminating this threat to their power. As dawn broke once more, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor, the four unlikely allies made a pact. They would work together to expose the syndicate, to bring justice to those who had manipulated their lives for so long. But more than that, they would fight for a future where no other families would be torn apart by greed and corruption. Adebayo, once driven by the pursuit of wealth and status, found a new purpose igniting within him. Olayinka, her world shaken by the discovery of her true origins, felt a strength she had never known before. Amora, finally free from the shadows that had defined her existence, dared to hope for a life of her own choosing. And Mama Zainab, carrying the weight of decades of secrets, saw a chance for redemption. As they stepped out into the bustling streets of Lagos, blending into the morning crowd, they knew that the real battle was just beginning. The syndicate's agents would be searching for them, and every step they took would be fraught with danger. But for the first time in a long time, they moved not with fear, but with purpose. The game had changed. The pawns had become players. And the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Little did they know that even as they plotted their next move, events were unfolding across the city that would once again upend their world. In a luxurious penthouse overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, a figure stood silhouetted against the rising sun. Chidi Nwosu, his face twisted into a cruel smile, spoke softly into a phone. "They've taken the bait," he said. "Everything is proceeding according to plan." As he ended the call, Chidi turned to gaze out over the city he sought to control. The pieces were in motion, the players were on the board, and the true game was only just beginning. The sun hung low over Lagos, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as Adebayo, Olayinka, Amora, and Mama Zainab huddled in a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of the city. Weeks had passed since their dramatic escape, and in that time, they had been busy. The tiny living room was a chaos of papers, laptops, and hastily scribbled notes, the accumulated intelligence of their investigation into the syndicate. Adebayo stood by the window, his eyes scanning the street below for any sign of trouble. He had changed in these past weeks, the soft edges of his former life hardened by purpose and determination. "We are close," he said, turning back to the group. "I can feel it." Olayinka and Amora sat side by side on a warm couch, their resemblance even more striking now that they had gotten to know each other. They had spent countless hours sharing stories, filling in the blanks of their separate lives. The bond between them, dormant for so long, had blossomed into something fierce and unbreakable. Mama Zainab, her face lined with worry but her eyes bright with determination, spread a large map of Lagos across the coffee table. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady, "We make our move." Their plan was audacious, perhaps even foolhardy. Using Adebayo's insider knowledge and Mama Zainab's underground connections, they had pieced together the location of a secret syndicate meeting. Key players from across West Africa would be gathering to discuss their next big move, a plot to manipulate upcoming elections across the region. "If we can get evidence of this meeting," Adebayo explained, "we can blow the whole thing wide open. Governments, international organizations, they won't be able to ignore this." But as they went over the plan one last time, a nagging doubt gnawed at Olayinka's mind. "It feels too easy," she said, voicing her concerns. "After everything we've been through, why haven't they come for us yet?" Her words hung in the air, giving voice to the unease they had all felt but had been afraid to acknowledge. They had been so focused on their mission, on the thrill of finally taking action, that they had pushed aside the warning bells in their minds. As if in answer to Olayinka's question, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Everyone froze, eyes wide with sudden fear. Adebayo moved silently to the peephole, then stumbled back in shock. "It's Chidi," he whispered. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm them. Had they been discovered? Was this the end of their fight before it had even truly begun? But then, surprising everyone, Mama Zainab stepped forward. "Let him in," she said firmly. "Are you mad?" Amara hissed, but Mama Zainab's expression brooked no argument. With trembling hands, Adebayo opened the door. Chidi Nwosu strode in, his expensive suit out of place in the humble surroundings. But something was different about him. The smug arrogance that had always characterized his demeanor was gone, replaced by a haunted look in his eyes. "We don't have much time," Chidi said without preamble. "They are coming." What followed was a revelation that shook the very foundations of everything they thought they knew. Chidi, it turned out, was not the villain they had believed him to be. He was a deep-cover agent, working for years to infiltrate the highest echelons of the syndicate. "I've done terrible things," he confessed, unable to meet Olayinka's eyes. "All to maintain my cover. But it ends now. Tonight." As Chidi laid out the true extent of the syndicate's plans, the enormity of what they were facing became clear. It wasn't just about Nigeria, or even West Africa. The syndicate's tendrils reached across continents, influencing governments, manipulating markets, and shaping the course of history from the shadows. "The meeting tomorrow is a trap," Chidi explained. "They've known about you for weeks. They've been watching, waiting to see what you would do. And now they are ready to eliminate all of you in one fell swoop." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. All their careful planning, their dreams of exposing the truth, seemed to crumble in an instant. But as the initial shock wore off, a new determination took hold. "Then we changed the game," Adebayo said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We spring the trap before it can be sprung." Through the night, they worked feverishly, adapting their plan with Chidi's insider knowledge. As dawn broke, they set out into the awakening city, each knowing that the coming hours would determine not just their own fates, but potentially the fate of nations. Their target was no longer just the meeting, but the very heart of the syndicate's operations in Lagos, a skyscraper in the heart of the business district that hid a secret command center in its uppermost floors. It was a suicide mission by any rational measure, but they were long past the point of playing it safe. As they approached the building, each taking their predetermined positions, Olayinka and Amora shared a final look. In that moment, a lifetime of separation and longing passed between them. Whatever happened next, they faced it together. The next hours were a blur of action and heart-stopping tension. Adebayo, drawing on all his business acumen and newly honed street smarts, smooth-talked his way past the initial security checkpoints. Mama Zainab, proving that age had not dimmed her skills, deftly manipulated the building systems from a commandeered maintenance room. Chidi, his cover now irrevocably blown, led the charge to the upper floors, his intimate knowledge of the syndicate's protocols opening doors that would have otherwise remained sealed. And through it all, Olayinka and Amora moved as one, their long-dormant connection blossoming into an almost supernatural synchronicity. But as they fought their way ever upward, it became clear that the syndicate had indeed been prepared for them. Waves of security personnel converged on their position, each confrontation more desperate than the last. Bullets flew, alarms blared, and more than once, it seemed their luck had finally run out. It was in one such moment, cornered in a lavish boardroom with enemies closing in from all sides, that the true power of the twins' bond revealed itself. As Olayinka and Amora stood back to back, hands clasped, a strange energy seemed to fill the room. The air crackled with an unseen force, and for a brief, impossible moment, time itself seemed to slow. In that frozen instant, images flashed through the twins' minds, glimpses of other times, other places, other lives. They saw themselves across history, always together, always standing against tyranny and oppression. They saw the true depth of the prophecy that had shaped their lives, understanding at last that their power lay not in some mystical force, but in the unbreakable bond of their shared soul. As time snapped back into motion, Olayinka and Amora moved with a preternatural coordination. Their actions, guided by the wisdom of countless lifetimes, turned the tide of the battle. Security personnel fell before them, not dead but incapacitated, their weapons and wheels neutralized by the twins' impossible speed and precision. With this newfound power leading the way, they finally breached the syndicate's inner sanctum. There, in a room of screens and humming servers, they found the evidence they had sought, decades of corruption and manipulation laid bare in countless files and recordings. But their victory was short-lived. Even as Adebayo worked to secure and transmit the data to trusted contacts around the world, a new threat emerged. The building itself, it seemed, had been rigged as a failsafe. If the syndicate couldn't protect its secrets, it would bury them instead. As the first explosions rocked the lower floors, the true cost of their mission became clear. They had succeeded in exposing the syndicate, but the price would be their own lives. In those final moments, as smoke filled the air and the floor trembled beneath them, a lifetime of regrets and unspoken words passed between them all. Adebayo and Olayinka shared a last, tender embrace, their love having weathered the storm of betrayal and hardship. Amora and Olayinka clasped hands, their connection complete at last. Mama Zainab looked upon them all with pride and sorrow, seeing in them the culmination of her life's work. And Chidi, his redemption finally at hand, stood tall and unafraid for the first time in years. But fate, it seemed, had one last twist in store. As the building groaned and swayed, ready to collapse, a helicopter appeared at the shattered windows. At its controls was a face they had never expected to see again, Mama Zainab's long-lost husband, a man they had all believed dead. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the glory, did you?" he shouted over the roar of the rotors. What followed was a daring escape that would be talked about for years to come. As the skyscraper crumbled behind them, raining debris onto the streets of Lagos, the helicopter wove a precarious path through the city's skyline. On the ground, riots were already breaking out as news of the syndicate's exposure spread like wildfire. In the days and weeks that followed, the full impact of their actions became clear. Governments toppled, corporations crumbled, and a wave of change swept across not just Nigeria, but the entire continent. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in generations, there was hope for true reform and justice. Adebayo and Olayinka, their bond tested by fire and stronger than ever, became vocal advocates for transparency and anti-corruption measures. Their story, a testament to love's ability to weather even the darkest storms, inspired millions. Amora, finally free to forge her own path, dedicated herself to helping other victims of trafficking and exploitation. Her work in rehabilitating and empowering survivors would go on to change countless lives. Mama Zainab and her husband, reunited after so many years, became elder statesmen in the new Nigeria that was slowly taking shape. Their wisdom and experience helped guide the nation through the turbulent times of reconstruction. And Chidi, his years of sacrifice finally redeemed, found a new purpose in working to rebuild the institutions he had once helped to undermine. His insider knowledge proved invaluable in rooting out the last vestiges of the syndicate's influence. As for the twins' mysterious power, it faded as quickly as it had appeared. But the connection between Olayinka and Amora remained, a bond that went beyond mere blood or shared experience. They had glimpsed the truth of their existence, that their lives were but one chapter in an eternal story of love, sacrifice, and the endless fight for justice. Years later, on a warm Lagos evening much like the one that had started it all, the unlikely family gathered on the rooftop of a modest apartment building. The city spread out before them, changed in so many ways yet still pulsing with the same indomitable spirit. As they shared a meal and laughter, their conversation turned to the future. There was still so much work to be done, so many wrongs to right. But as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For in the end, that was the true lesson of their incredible journey. That in the darkest of times, it is the bonds we forge, of love, of family, of shared purpose, that light the way forward. That even in a world of shadowy conspiracies and ancient prophecies, the greatest power of all lies in the simple choice to stand together against the tide of history. As night fell over Lagos, a city reborn, Adebayo raised his glass in a toast. To the future, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And to the family we found along the way. The others joined him, their glasses clinking in the warm night air. And as they stood there, silhouetted against the glittering skyline, they knew that their story, a tale of love, loss, redemption, and the indomitable spirit of a nation, would be told for generations to come. For in that moment, they were more than just individuals. They were a testament to the power of the human spirit, a living embodiment of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. And in a world that so often seemed dark and chaotic, they stood as a beacon of light, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage and compassion can change the course of history. The future, with all its uncertainties and challenges, awaited them. But whatever it might bring, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, bound by love, united in purpose, and unbreakable in spirit. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky above Lagos, a new chapter in their extraordinary tale began to unfold. For some stories, after all, never truly end. They simply pause, waiting for the next generation to take up the torch and continue the eternal struggle for justice, truth, and the betterment of all mankind.